How do you decide whether or not to stay in your role or in your organization? These days, people are leaving their jobs in record numbers to find opportunities that better meet their needs. So, what can managers and companies do to make their workplaces stickier? This week, I talk with Donovan, a former HR leader turned entrepreneur who's on a mission to make workplaces better for everyone. She shares her research on the reasons people stay or leave and what we can all do to build better workplaces. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Anne. I'm so excited to meet you and to have this conversation today. I'd love to start by inviting you to introduce yourself.
Kim, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, and I hope that your listeners get a lot out of our conversation today. And so a little bit about me is I am human resources consultant. I started Donovan HR Solutions a mere 8 months ago after spending 20 years behind the desk. I started in human resources as an HR admin and then moved into employment manager and eventually on up the ranks to director of human resources. And my focus now, after starting my own business, is working with organizations. And my mission in life is to make the workplace better for everyone. And I do that by focusing on employee retention. And I fell in love with employee retention about 20 years ago when I was promoted to employment manager for a large hotel in the Midwest. And I was opened up to the world of turnover and digging into turnover when an employee leaves an organization and we have to replace that employee. And to me, I was just spinning my wheels because it just seemed that it was a constant churn. And I started digging into it more and more and realized, asking myself, well, why do employees leave and how can we get them to stay? And that's 20 years later. I am working with companies now to work with employees to get them to stay.
I can't wait to dive deeper into this because I love what you said about making the workplace better for everyone. That is a big mission of mine as well. And we probably have some overlap, but also some complementary ways in which we think about that problem. And I'm also mindful of the fact that there's so much emphasis placed on recruitment and not necessarily as much on the retention side once people are hired. So I'm curious what your experience shows, maybe research that you've done or just anecdotally. Why do people leave? What are the biggest reasons why people leave?
I have done a lot of research, but it's also working in high turnover industries such as retail and hospitality and having to focus on that recruiting piece. We're short-staffed. We need to fill this position. Well, why don't we work on keeping them? And I started doing a lot of feedback sessions with employees just to get their feedback on why they stay. Because organizations do a lot of exit interviews, is that when an employee leaves, why are they leaving? Let's find that out. But that is the wrong time to do it. So I do what it's now called stay interviews. And it's about 10 to 12 questions, but it's really like, what keeps you here? What do you like about your job? What motivates you? And it boils down to communication and transparency within the company. Employees are vested in the company that they work for, and the more knowledge that they have about the company keeps them around. It's employees want to know how their work is impacting the business. So communication is a big piece. Training and development. Employees want training for their current job. They want to know how to do their job right. And so they need that clear training in the beginning. And then they want development for career progression, whether they want to move up into leadership or they want to stay and be a valued individual contributor. They want development. Humans have a natural tendency to learn and grow, and companies can do a world of service if they provide that development. They want pay and benefits, so pay competitively and fairly, offer great benefits so that they can take care of their families or their own lives. They want a great onboarding experience. So that's where the training starts. And if you just throw your employees out on the floor and say, here, have at it, good luck. Oh, yeah, maybe John will show you the ropes or something. Employees aren't likely to stay around. But if you have a clear onboarding procedure and a great welcoming process, employees are likely to stick around. And then trust. Employees want trust from leadership, they want trust from their coworkers, and building that trust within an organization lends a lot. Having a great mission, vision, values helps. And not every company's culture is going to be the same, but employees want that alignment with the culture. So really talk about your company's culture in the recruiting process. And that should weave through every single job posting, job description, piece of marketing material that you have out there. And so I know that there's a lot that I just threw out there, but there's a lot that companies can do to retain their employees.
What's really interesting is that I'm looking at some of the things that you shared and I'm thinking about communication and transparency. I'm thinking about training and development. I'm thinking about pay. Really, a lot of those are trust-based practices, right? Because if they feel like you're withholding information, if they feel like you're not treating them fairly, paying them fairly, or not investing in them, then that creates a sense of, not sure this is the right place for me, right? I'm also curious your perspective from a trust perspective on some of the behavioral aspects. And so, the cliche that people leave managers, not jobs. So that, how your manager shows up is a big part of that. And so non-inclusive behaviors, sometimes toxic behaviors, some of the sort of day-to-day stuff that people deal with that just makes them feel either unwelcome or like they're treated disrespectfully. Is that part of trust, would you say? Or is that something more of a standalone issue?
No, I agree with you completely that it seems like all of these behaviors of paying competitively and fairly and communicating and being transparent, it does all lend to trust. And that if the companies don't have the trust up front, then that just automatically starts off on a bad foot and can build that distrust throughout.
I also wonder because when you talk about something like, I'm just going to use the training and development piece for a moment. Mm-hmm. And I see this as an observer on the outside. You're much closer to it than I am. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, but it seems like we've reached a point in history where more and more people expect that you're only going to stay with a job for a certain amount of time, that it is a step along the journey. And, maybe you camp out there for a couple of years, but you're not going to lay down roots. Right. And so I can imagine that if that's the expectation, that it would be less attractive or perhaps feel like less of a worthwhile investment on the part of the employer to do things like training and development if they know they're just training and developing their people to take those skills with them to wherever it is that they go next, right? So it almost feels like, oh, why bother? Whereas on the other hand, I can imagine an argument that says, well, maybe if you train and develop them, they'll stay. Right? So
that's it exactly. So the Gallup did a poll recently that an 82% of millennials, which is now what the 30 to 40-year-olds that are in their mid careers, they will stay for 5 years longer with the company if the company does invest in their training and development. So that 5 years affords the company more knowledge that employee gives. It can lead to customer retention with that employee. And so even 5 years, which when you have high turnover, it seems like an eternity. And nobody does stick around for 35, 40 years to get that gold watch anymore. But the even getting that 5 years, it can build a stronger organization. It can build a bigger customer pipeline and retain customers, because the employee retention ultimately does affect your customers. And the longer that you have somebody in a job, the more they can benefit your customers. So
Mm.
go ahead and invest in that training and development. And then rather than sticking around for 6 months or a year, they'll stick around for 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, and that continuity is so important, like you said, from a customer experience, from just a business continuity perspective, right? Of having people with institutional knowledge, how things get done, and being able to mentor other people. And so, one thing I wonder about too, and this is my own personal bias, but you could tell me what your thoughts are, going back to this idea that people leave managers, not companies. What are we getting wrong about developing managers, or where's the opportunity to better develop managers so that people do feel more connection to their roles and their companies? They do feel a greater sense of trust. Where's the disconnect there?
It requires a huge mindset shift. And we all need to change our thinking in that employees are more than numbers, that they're more than just go in, make your widgets, clock out at the end of the day and go home. And in building that trust, managers do need to realize that their employees are people first. So managers should start to build that trust with the employees, have one-on-one feedback, open the lines of communication. And I'm not one for small talk, but got to learn that, yes, having small talk and getting to know employees on a more personal level builds a deeper connection. And they're starting to understand all of that their employees are people. And so just think that it takes a great mindset shift, that
Hmm.
we're more than just numbers.
And I also think about this in terms of people getting promoted to people management who don't necessarily want to be there in the first place. It feels like the fastest way to grow, make more money, get higher status, whatever the case may be. But the actual work involved in developing people, giving them that kind of feedback, taking care of them isn't necessarily what they want to be doing. And so that mismatch has lots of ripple effects.
Yes, it does. And it happens so often.
Yeah, and it feels like to me, I mean, and it's been a while since I worked inside of an organization, but I work with organizations a lot, and I feel like the act of promoting your superstars to managers is probably not the way to get to where you want to go. I think a solid B player, who's somebody who really likes mentoring others, who really wants to help the team grow, makes a much better manager than the A player who's really independently motivated and just wants to produce. And so I wonder, when you're talking with organizations, or even just within your own career, I'm talking with managers within your companies, do you think there's any shift happening in terms of how people get evaluated for people manager roles, or how those decisions get made?
There's a shift, and it's starting to get momentum, because I think that we're finally learning that not everybody has to be a manager, and not everybody's going to excel as a manager. But for so long, it just seemed like that was the career progression. If you want to succeed, if you want to get a promotion, you want to get a raise, you have to become a
Mm.
leader. You need to go into management. And we just need to be okay with that's not the career path for everybody. And so companies now are understanding that having more frequent one-on-one conversations instead of your annual performance review and what happened in the past year and where do you feel like your career is going, but more frequent, more informal one-on-one conversations and do true career pathing. Because, like you said, Kim, not everybody is going to be a great manager. You take your awesome B player who is fantastic with people, that's who you promote into management. And then you take that superstar who can just produce, and you find some other path for them to succeed and get promoted so that you can keep them around.
Yeah. And I think that's fairly new, at least from my experience, to have promotion tracks that don't include managing people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was sort of the bargain is, okay, I'll deal with managing people if it means that I can advance my career when there's no other alternative. But to acknowledge that people still want to grow, people still can add increasing value without having direct reports.
Mm-hmm. So not every sales manager or superstar salesperson is going to be a superstar sales manager. It is such completely different skill sets, and we really need to play to each other's strengths. So why put that round peg in a square hole if that's not where they're going to excel?
Yeah.
So really play to people's strengths.
What do you see as different today now that we're in this sort of new world post pandemic? I feel like the pandemic sort of revealed all the cracks in the foundation and brought to light a lot of issues that we weren't necessarily motivated to pay attention to in the past. Is there a meaningful difference in your mind between sort of 2019, 2020, early 2020, and now how we think about things today?
There's definitely been a shift, and I don't think I can verbalize it. I think about it all the time. I think that employees are finding their voice and are being okay with saying, vocalizing their needs. Whereas before it was, my boss told me I have to show up to the office. I'm going to be there from 8 to 5. I'm going to be chained to my desk. I'm going to produce. Whereas now I feel that there's a lot more flexibility. And organizations are realizing that people are people and we all have lives outside of the office. I remember my very first corporate job, I was told to check all my baggage at the door. And so it was put on a stoic face and don't let any emotions but pure joy come through because I was working in hospitality. But we do have lives outside of the work. And if I have to if my dog breaks her leg, then I'm going to piece out of work and go take care of my dog. But when I'm at work, I'm going to be 100% focused. And so I think there has been a shift towards that flexibility and that we really do need to change because running a business isn't like it was in 2019.
Mm.
And people aren't what they were in 2019. So,
You're making me think too about, especially if a company really is driven to retain its employees, then that suggests, although I'm sure it differs from company to company and manager to manager, but it suggests that they would want to hear from their employees what they need or where their concerns lie, or to give them a bigger voice. But I think a lot of people are still afraid that if they speak up, there will be some backlash to that. They will be seen as not cooperative or team players. There will be some kind of penalty to their career advancement. It's going to undermine relationships. And so there are a lot of people right now who are suffering in silence that are probably sort of silently looking for a new job because they've determined that this isn't the right place for them, without realizing that if they spoke up, they might actually be able to get what they're looking for, or at least get more than they think they can. And so I'm curious if you have advice for people who are feeling like, you know what, I think it's time for me to leave because they're making assumptions about what is or is not possible within the environment that they're in.
And I think that that happens so often because there hasn't been a culture of trust and transparency. And so employees are making up these narratives in their head without talking things through. And they may be afraid to speak up. They may be afraid of possible repercussions. And so my advice is set that meeting with your manager and be prepared for an open dialogue. Take notes. I know that sounds goofy. I'm walking into a meeting with my manager and I have my bullet points, but if you feel a heightened state of anxiety because of what you think the repercussions are going to be, take notes. Go in with your bullet points about the different topics you want to talk about. And I bet the majority of people who take that meeting with their manager will be surprised because their manager doesn't know that they have all of this other stuff going on inside their head or outside of work. And I bet that they're in the sense of retaining employees, managers want to know what's going on. They want to know how they can work with employees to make work a little bit better. And so it's just dig down deep, put together role play with somebody if you want to, but just put that meeting on your manager's calendar. I bet you're going to be surprised.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I think that one of the things that I often say is your manager can't read your mind. And as long as you are showing up and pleasantly getting your work done on time, there's no reason for your manager to come to you and say, is there anything else I could be doing to make you great? It's just not realistic that they're going to come in and volunteer that. There is no reason to believe that there is a problem. And so I know, again, that there's a lot of fear around it, but my philosophy is always too that whatever the outcome of that meeting, it's data, right? Either you're pleasantly surprised, like you said, and you get at least some of what you're looking for, or you're told very definitively that that isn't possible. And then it becomes information on which you get to make an informed decision about what works better for you, right? So at least if you do decide to leave, you feel like you did everything you can to make this work. And now you have evidence that this isn't the right place for you.
And you also know that you can have those types of conversations. Because if you do decide to resign, you go to another company and whoa, you're probably going to run into similar situations there. So now you can open up that door, you can have those conversations, and it's not as scary as I guarantee you, your manager probably won't kick you in the shins by having that conversation.
Right, exactly. And if they do, then they're a terrible manager, right?
And there's your data.
But I really like that too, because the only common denominator across your career is you. And so if you're finding that you're repeating the same patterns or you're noticing similarities in experience across different jobs, is because you're bringing you to each one of these situations. And so one of the things I think about a lot too is that if you've already decided, I'm just checked out and I'm not going to stay here for very long, all the more reason to have the conversation, because what have you got to lose? And in that case, what it becomes is practice for self-advocacy. It becomes so, and in the best of worlds, like you said, maybe you find out, oh, actually, I had no idea this was possible. I'm going to rethink my whole strategy, or I'm going to get more comfortable with advocating for myself so that when I do end up in the right place, I don't let it get to this point going forward.
exactly. And self-advocacy is, I'm a huge fan of. And growing up in the corporate world, have had to do it because I have had some incredible cheerleaders in my back with who got my back and some incredible mentors. But there are some companies that if I didn't speak up or I didn't ask for what I needed, then I wasn't going to get what I needed and I wasn't able to do my job. And so building that skill set to be a self advocate is hard,
Mhm.
but it is possible. And so,
Yeah, it's worthwhile too, right? And I think
mhm,
that when you talk about this idea of retention, I am I have a big bias towards empowerment. And so I think that there is a responsibility within all organizations to focus on retention for all the reasons that we talked about. I think managers should be more self-aware. I think companies should be investing in leadership and culture and all of the things that make people want to stay. But I also believe that each one of us has a personal responsibility to ask for what we need, to sort of fight for what we believe in, to take that stand when it's important to us, because that's going to contribute to retention as well. You can't put all of the responsibility on someone else. You have to be
yeah.
responsibility for your own career too. And I know that as much as there is a shift in terms of how long people stay within companies, it's a pain. It is not fun to be on a new job search every 1 to 2 years. It's not something that people look forward to. And so that comes with cost to the individual as well. It's not just cost to the employer. And so there's benefit to us to finding a place where we can stay for a while and invest in that kind of growth and development. But it's incumbent upon us to let our managers and other leaders know what that needs to look like in order for us to
Mhm.
stay there.
Exactly. So I like that you put it back onto personal responsibility because we are responsible for our own actions. We're responsible for the way that we take in our world, and we only have control over ourselves. And so
Yes.
I like that you put it back to personal responsibility.
Thank you. And I say that without, I'm mindful of the fact that it may sometimes come across as judgmental or critical, but really I speak as someone who has a tremendous amount of anxiety on a regular basis. So for me, I always want to feel in control. I just never want to feel like a victim. And I am always thinking about it from the perspective of like, how can we eliminate victimhood in these dynamics, recognize the realities that we are up against, and take matters into our own hands whenever we can. And so it's really about that empowerment piece. I can't control what my manager does, but I can control what conversation I bring to that relationship.
Hmm. And I can control how I react to that discussion, how I react to the situation.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. So tell us a little bit more about your transition. What made you decide after 20 years that you wanted to go out on your own?
I really do want to change the world. Well,
Mhm.
um, the my mission is to make it the workplace for better for everybody. And I can, if I'm working for one company in their people and culture department, then I'm impacting that one organization. But as a consultant or speaker, I can go out and I can impact a much larger audience and I can take my message out to that many more people. And I'm really not the best with 8 to 5 schedules. I'm not the best with Monday through Friday. So I wake up very early in the morning and I knock out a bunch of work and then I take a break and then I knock out a bunch of work in the evening. So I'm working your traditional schedule is not for me. And for me to have the flexibility that where I'm most productive and I'm the best, then I decided to branch out on my own. And I'll tell you what, it's not easy, but it's been a blast. So
congratulations on taking such a big step. I think that's really like a great example of facing your fears, which I'm always advocating for.
same. What am I afraid of today? Let's go tackle it.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting because, just sort of thinking about this bigger holistic conversation that we're having, I think it's wonderful that you are motivated to have a bigger impact and, sort of spread yourself around to other parts, not just one company, but others. What I think is a shame is that you can't have that kind of scheduling flexibility, or you are less likely to get it, right? Because I think that's a big part of this conversation too. Why not let people work when they have the most energy? Why not let people be? I understand that there are certain times when you have to be available because your customers are going to call in at a certain time, or right, you have to get meetings with people that are scheduled at a certain time. But generally speaking, to have the kind of choice on where and when you work so that you can be at your peak when you are contributing. And it feels like, although the pandemic sort of proved that we're capable of doing this, we're starting to see now some backsliding with companies getting really strict and really sort of, firm about saying, nope, I want people back in the office. We want this to look the way it used to. And I worry that the lessons that we've learned, the progress that we've made over the last few years are going to erode if we don't hold on to them.
I see the backslide too, Kim, but I also see it's not as great as a backslide as it could be. So people are retaining some of their flexibility. The gig economy is larger than ever and is growing. I see it in professional services. I see it not just with Uber drivers and DoorDash, but professional services, fractional HR, fractional accounting, things like that. So we are seeing more and more. The only word that's coming to mind is demand to return to office. But I think that we'll find a happy medium, because some people do thrive in their office setting and they need that, whereas others need the sanctity of working from home or coffee shop or wherever they work from, because that's where they're most productive. So I think that with all of this, everything will shake out and we'll find the happy medium for everybody so people can be more satisfied in their jobs and more productive for the company.
I hope so. And I think, I'm sort of always the optimist. I wouldn't do what I do if I didn't believe there was hope.
I don't think anybody could do what they did.
Yeah. So it is good to hear that. I think, with any kind of progress, there's always steps forward and steps back. And so we will find an equilibrium, hopefully at some point. Anything else that you think is important to bring to this conversation? I think you've shared so many great insights, and I love sort of the focus on retention in particular and what we can all be doing to contribute to that. So the sort of, I would say, initiative.
I could talk about this all day long. So I think that we've covered a great amount that I think your listeners will take some nuggets from. And so I don't have any further insight into the conversation now, or else it would just go on and on and on.
Well, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and your work?
So on my website at donovanhrsolutions.com and on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me, and I share some insights on there. So
great. Well, Thank you so much, and best of luck to you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing, and I hope for all of our sake that it continues to go well.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation and I had a blast. So thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.